Thanks a million, Pranjali, and thanks a lot for the invite to speak. And I hope the talk will be worth the wait. And apologies for my own part for part of the delay in it. And thanks also for the words about myself. Yes, I have a background quickly in the Mesolithic of the Near East, and using ethnographic research of hunter-gatherers to try to give us ideas how to interpret prehistoric ritual practices and beliefs. I've been lucky enough to live up here in the Burren for the past 5 years. So I'm, yes, a blow-in, and originally from Dublin. I got to work on the Archaeological Survey of Ireland site descriptions in the Burren. And like everyone, looking through the archaeology and just being here in the Burren, I was immediately struck by the incredible preservation of archaeological remains in the Burren. And it just really is amazing how the centuries and the millennia are visible across this wonderful landscape. You know, hop over a wall and you're looking at a wedge tomb, and you hardly need to dig half the time. I fell in love with the image of the Burren in the period immediately after the Ice Age, when, as many of you will know, it appears to have been covered by a patchwork of woods and different microenvironments, which I'll talk about. And I've been excited by the idea of finding relatively undisturbed Mesolithic hunter-gatherer sites here, thanks in part to that undisturbed quality of the Burren, as I mentioned. And this talk originated as a kind of a sales pitch to myself for how to go about researching Mesolithic sites in the Burren. It now is something of a sales pitch to anyone out there who's interested in getting involved in such a project, which I continue to be interested in. Anyone out there who possibly has come across a site they'd be curious to share. And what underpins this talk and motivates me then is the question: where are the most promising places to look for Mesolithic remains in the Burren? And I've been inspired in this by early antiquarians like Westrup and McNamara, but of course, modern academic experts like Woodman and Warren, Michael Gibbons, Killian Driscoll, Amy Little, and others. But a special mention must go to Michael and Clodagh Lynch and their colleagues and the Burren Bio conservation volunteers for their incredible discoveries on the coast between Doolin and Fanor. Their work in finding and digging and continuing to research this vast wealth of information from the sites has just been an incredible boon, bringing to life a picture of Mesolithic activity, along the Burren coast. In this talk, so I'll give a quick general overview of the Burren, of the Mesolithic rather, and I will talk a bit about the ancient prehistoric environment, which is so important when any hunter-gatherer groups. I will then look at the evidence that we do have for Mesolithic foragers in the Burren. And finally, I'll do a bit of speculating for fun about how we might find more sites. And just to mention, there are some images I forgot to, or rather I couldn't find a credit for. So apologies for that. I found them on the net. Right, so Mesolithic hunter-gatherers, these were the earliest pre-farming peoples in Ireland. And now I'm going to quickly dive into the broad strokes of this very distant, enigmatic period in history. And I have a very naive, honestly, romantic view of the Mesolithic, how these hunter-gatherers were most certainly in tune with nature, and most certainly were very crafty and very knowledgeable of the environment. They lived in the early Holocene period in geological terms. So that's the tail end of the last ice age, which was about 10,000 years ago now. The earliest farming didn't get going until 6,000 years ago at the earliest. So that's a 4,000 year period we're talking about Um, uh, Counting, sorry, the earliest substantial occupation was 8,000 BC until the earliest farming. So that's where that date comes from. There is earlier evidence than 8,000, as you see here, this bare kneecap found in a cave near Ennis, which for some strange reason people decided to put these marks in. And there's earlier evidence again. Now we're pushing back into what might be called the Irish late Upper Paleolithic. Very limited evidence from these Ice Age times. But when we're talking about hunter-gatherer Ireland, we're talking about a major chunk of Irish history, even not counting these late Upper Paleolithic findings. Even starting from the first period of substantial occupation in Ireland, 8,000 BC or so, it's still an enormous span of time. And we are now actually in an age of discovery of that period, findings such as these from animal bone assemblages, thanks to the work of people like Ruth Carden, also thanks to discoveries on the big roadway projects and ancient DNA studies. So this is a time when a lot of long-held assumptions about the Mesolithic are being questioned. So a great time to be involved in it. A very, very long period in Irish history. And it is also what is in archaeological terms, the period that is the most ephemeral, the hardest to trace and to find evidence for on the ground. As mentioned, not counting that late Upper Paleolithic pioneering stage. So that means more time for archaeological remains to be destroyed by later evidence and natural processes, of course. But crucially also, Mesolithic people lived in small temporary camps, which leave only traces of post holes and places where they lit fires, made flint tools, animal bone scatters, and so on. And that's what you're seeing here on the left from Mount Sandal, the post holes, and people very exhaustively skimming back thin layers of earth to try to find spits of flint tools. Very rarely do we get wonderfully preserved organic remains like this fish trap here on the right from County Meath, which was preserved thanks to the mud environment, the anaerobic environment in which it was found. Here's a reconstruction of a Mesolithic hut from Scotland, just to highlight how fragile and impermanent these structures and sites were. So actually, we're really lucky to have found any of them in a way. What do we know about Mesolithic people in Ireland? Well, they were just like us in physiological terms. And recent DNA studies will have shown, I don't know if you saw that Heart of Stone series on RTE, but also discoveries from elsewhere in Northern Europe. Many Mesolithic people in this part of the world actually had very dark skin and blue eyes, so an unusual trait. We live in permanent homes. They moved strategically through the landscape, not in a nomadic way, randomly, but in seasonal patterns and rhythms, moving between relatively short-term, as far as we can tell, base camps where several families or maybe larger groups would have aggregated temporarily, or nuclear families camps, hunting camps, foraging camps. And then, of course, there are places where people gathered for reasons we don't know why. Certainly for food in part, no doubt, many of them, but they returned again and again to places like shell middens, which are layers of shell and other waste and remains that would be visible as a layer in the ground, or even in some cases as actual physical bumps or mounds in the landscape. But generally, Mesolithic hunter-gatherers left few, if any, marks. They're very difficult to find, and when we are lucky enough to find them, what we do find, though, interestingly, is that Mesolithic sites tend to be near water. The classic on a bluff raised ground overlooking a river or a floodplain. Mount Sandal, the site shown previously, is the most famous, but there are many others on the lower Bann River Valley, the Liffey Valley leak slip, Kilcummer on the Albeg and the Blackwater rivers, Hermitage on the Shannon just there near Limerick, and many others. And late Mesolithic sites tend to be found by lakes and wetlands, fording points, and of course coastal locations, as at Fanor and Doolin. And that's the dominant pattern that's shown by field research in where Mesolithic campsites tend to be. Actually, that pattern is also come through in big motorway projects, which cut these enormous, less biased swathes through the landscape. Again and again, there we see Mesolithic sites turning up above floodplains, in low rolling hills and near water. So it's safe to conclude that a strong theme in the lives of hunter-gatherers in Ireland is to focus on lowlands, rivers and lakes. They just seem to prefer living or camping in such places. I have wondered, or had wondered, maybe these patterns are just a result of modern farmers and walkers coming across lithic scatters and other sites, because we tend to be more in the lowlands. It's also where researchers do a lot of their research, and it's also where road builders build a lot of their roads. And I wondered maybe if we explored the uplands, we might find more signs of Mesolithic hunter-gatherer presence there, using the land, passing through the land. But not for the first time in my career, after the initial excitement of this idea, I found out that, of course, many others have asked this question already. So leading experts on the Mesolithic in Ireland, such as Peter Woodman, Graham Warren, Thomas Cador, and others, have looked at this, and they found that no, when you find prehistoric sites and remains in the uplands, they tend to be Neolithic or Bronze Age. And you might argue that, oh, well, they're not finding Mesolithic sites in the uplands because there were fewer people back in the Mesolithic, as far as we can tell, and their tools and sites were more modest and ambiguous looking. But as far as we can tell, that is the pattern that's holding, that Mesolithic sites are relatively rare in the uplands in regions such as much of the Burren. And in asking what's this all about, what's driving this distribution pattern of sites, it looks to be largely the result of a scarcity of large animals to be hunted in the Irish Mesolithic. Unlike many parts of Europe, where Mesolithic people went to high altitudes for seasonal hunting of large animals, Ireland had no deer or wild cattle then. And the animals that were the targets of hunting here in Ireland, such as wild boar, didn't go into people would have gone to such as the Burren, but and this is a research question that has drawn the experts to wonder what are the factors that would be attracting the resources that would be attracting Mesolithic people to the highlands, to the uplands, and there's plenty of resources we still need to examine. And as Bettina Stefanini has pointed out, we really do know so little about what plants might have been useful to those people. And in general, it's safe to say that we know nature far less well than they did in many ways. And finally, there's evidence for a spectrum of Mesolithic diets across many sites, not just aquatic focused foods. So we can fully expect that they were making use of all resources available. And beyond food, there would have been other reasons for people to visit the uplands and places such as the Burren. And this has been the driver of a great interest in expanding research to the uplands and to places such as the Burren. So now moving to the environment, the Burren just after the Ice Age, what do we know about it? What was it like? First, to say that when studying hunter-gatherers, knowing more about their environment is just as important as knowing, if one wanted to understand a farmer society, knowing more about livestock and crops. The environment is the dominant factor in Mesolithic, or a dominant factor in Mesolithic societies, and seasonal rhythms. So the Burren environment, going back to the early Holocene, 10,000 years ago, and so on, and from then on, reconstructions of the environment are based on geological coring and other sampling and pooling of evidence from elsewhere in Ireland. And I'll just start by mentioning actually a wonderful Burren BO talk given a few years ago now by Colin Bunce, which should be still available on the Burren BO YouTube page, going into just this topic, the environment of the post-Ice Age Burren. As far as we can see from the work of such experts, the currently best supported picture of the Burren back then, after the Ice Age, when the ice sheets retreated 14,000 years ago, having covered the Burren, gradually there developed a mosaic of environments, including open Scots pine and hazel woodland with Arctic alpine flora, and also some open heathy environments with few grasslands. Now as then, there was diversity based on wind exposure, soil types, humidity, and atmospheric nutrient input, as determined by Jenny Roche, another great Burren BO webinar available there on their YouTube page. She did coring in Rock Forest Loch on the eastern side of the Burren, if I'm sure some of you recall, and she found Scots pine was the dominant tree pollen type in the most western and upland sites for at least part of the early Holocene, which would then see a decline after the uptake of farming and the intensification of farming further into the Bronze Age. Bare limestone was, bare limestone was probably not as extensive then as it is today, due to that soil erosion from deforestation and farming not having kicked in until later. Feaser and O'Connell, other paleoenvironmental researchers, studied peaty deposits from the Burren uplands around Capanawalla, and they sum up the environmental picture again as open woodlands, mainly dominated by hazel, with some open heath and grasslands, and this lovely description, which sounds like something you might see on a Swedish bottle of wine, maybe floristic affinities to Scandinavian open pine woodlands. So hopefully this gives some sense of the diversity of the Burren environment back then. Of course, to mention, it's very possible and plausible that human impact was going on the environment through hunting strategies, intentionally foraging, coppicing, and other practices. And hunter-gatherer influence on and even management of their natural environment is widely documented, but I will also say in some cases overstated. Coastline changes. We now know that the coastline at the last part of the Ice Age was 5 or 6 meters lower than today, and there are relative sea level models that continue to zero in on and offer more precision on that. So most of the coastal Mesolithic sites are likely to be not only underwater now, but also washed away and destroyed. However, in very sheltered bays and inlets and so on, you never know. And that mention of 11 Ballybo's, incredible site that survived up at the mouth of Loch Foyle, of all places, right there on a quite exposed coastline in general, but in a lovely inlet, which we'll see, or little bay, I should say. So you never know what might survive. Then as now, the Burren was a particular landscape. In some places, harsh, exposed environments, and in others less so. Without their expertise in the natural environment, it's very difficult guessing game to formulate a picture of what their subsistence strategy would have been like. But we can be sure that they were living on shellfish, a wide variety of plant resources, of course, wild boar, salmon, eel, water, hairs, a whole host of food resources. And I think it's fair to expect, and we see this evidence across Northern Europe, that although there were, of course, hard times, no doubt, starvation was a feature of life, and food shortage. There was also abundance. There were no wild cattle, aurochs, no red deer and reindeer. They were extinct for much of the period. There were bears, there were wolves. But without these large game, one might expect there'd be little reason for people to frequent the highlands, the uplands, sorry. But there were certainly plenty of resources we still need to examine. And indeed, it's by finding sites that you have the best chance to get a handle on what was drawing them here. Not all food sources are exploited by Mesolithic peoples. Just as a funny twist, at Ferreter's Cove, down in Kerry, not all edible shellfish were represented, and there was little wild pig also. And by the same token, not all of the decision making about where to go and what to do, what to hunt, where to camp, had to do with food. There's other reasons for people to visit the Burren, which we can only guess at. We see evidence for strange activities that we have to take as impractical in some sense, but reflecting another set of values. Graham Warren did a very interesting study of animal bone assemblages across Irish Mesolithic sites, and he found a component of birds of prey in the animals consumed at those sites. And he wondered, what was this about? Birds of prey known to not taste very good: eagles, peregrine falcons, owls. And one possibility is that they were consuming them for what you might maybe simplistically call shamanistic or animistic belief systems, driving a desire to ingest the power or the spirit of those animals. But in any case, what appears to be a non-practical decision from a subsistence point of view. So that's a glimpse of the hunter-gatherers environment. And again, maybe the major difference between us and them, and a great challenge for us in studying the Mesolithic hunter-gatherers, is that they most and were experts on balance, and so much changed with farming, and we are the heirs of that change now, trying to bridge that great gulf. But turning from that to the question of this common sense, indeed, such a culturally contingent concept. But turning from that to the actual evidence we have for Mesolithic hunter-gatherers in the Burren, I have to start first and foremost, of course, with the findings along the Doolin-Fanor coastline, led by Michael Lynch, Clodagh, and their colleagues, the Burren Bio Conservation volunteers, with Royal Irish Academy funding. They've been doing amazing work, very important Mesolithic discoveries and follow-up radiocarbon dating and other research on their sites, stone axe manufacturing sites in Fanor and Doolin. Radiocarbon dating showing a late Mesolithic presence there, 4.5 to 5,000 BC, with large quantities of shale flakes, some axe roughouts, hammer stones. The shell deposits, the middens I mentioned earlier along this coast, show that food was gathered here in a patterned way over time. And I'd be curious to learn more about those patterns myself, which might give hints towards seasonal movements in the area. And this wonderful research puts beyond doubt that Mesolithic people were active along that coastline. So we can only imagine what else people were doing there, things which left no trace, because of course the stone artifact assemblage is only a small component of Mesolithic sites. no less than walking into someone's house and seeing only objects made of ceramics or metal and not seeing anything else. Regarding the Burren uplands, we have findings just down from where I live, near Kilfenora, so in Loch Inchiquin, 43 axes, mostly shale, an arrowhead, a pierced deer antler, 12 other axes found within a 2-kilometre radius, a chert flake, a band flake found by the 19th century antiquarian McNamara up on the hill to the west of Loch Inchiquin. And Michael Lynch also found possible Mesolithic stone artifacts in the vicinity, and he justifiably asked whether maybe some of the polished stone axe heads found in Clare, often assumed to be Neolithic and date, might actually be Mesolithic, as we know others elsewhere are in Ireland. So Mesolithic people were, in any case, active around Loch Inchiquin also, and we have to assume that fish traps, weirs, and brushwood platforms would have been found here if preservation conditions allowed it, and perhaps they might, when lake levels drop. If they do, this has happened elsewhere. But such preservation is unfortunately rare in Ireland's acidic soils. The fish traps, weirs, and platforms on the Liffey estuary in Dublin of Mesolithic date are a rare exception, an early Mesolithic date, I believe. Interestingly, and at the same time, in a cautionary note sense, only one stone tool was found there on that Liffey estuary site. So had the wooden structures not survived thanks to anaerobic preservation conditions in the mud and the silt there of the intertidal zone, we may have only found at best that one tool and never thought more of it. And the same goes for so much of the Mesolithic and indeed prehistoric archaeology generally. We're really working with glimpses afforded by chance good decisions, good conditions, and good decisions by the people who reported and investigated, and good archaeologists involved. Another example of an extremely rare and very important Mesolithic finding, not quite in the Burren, but not too far, just over the Shannon near Limerick City there, north of Limerick City. On the Shannon at Hermitage. Just great fortune to have come across this incredible site. And thanks to that, we have our I think our only glimpse, almost the only glimpse of Mesolithic mortuary practices. And that's where this axe comes from. It comes from a cremation pit. It seems to have hardly been used before being crafted so wonderfully, and then it was intentionally blunted and deposited in the cremation pit, and a wooden post was put at the pit. Freeing us up to speculate on Mesolithic beliefs about the afterlife and so on. In the Burren, apart from the great work of the Lynches and others, such good fortune of preservation is yet to be found. And we might wonder what other sites are out there in the Burren waiting to reveal such incredible insights, views into their world. But for now, as far as we know, not much else it has been found of these people who certainly would have visited and passed through the Scandinavian open pine woodlands and heaths of the Burren. Another area that I'd just like to touch on quickly is caves. Of course, the Burren is rich in caves. None have yet revealed, as far as I know, any great hoard of Mesolithic finds. And in fairness, there's plenty of good reasons why people may not have used caves much. They are dangerous, dark, wet, cold, and so on. And we know at the same time, though, that caves were used by Mesolithic people in Ireland, Killora Cave, famous among them, but many others, and that earliest evidence for people in Ireland dating back to 33,000 years coming from caves. But also the water flow and the erosion and calcite and sediment buildup may not lend themselves to preserving, well, any archaeological remains, but especially Mesolithic, it being so ephemeral to start with and it being there for the longest period. I don't think Marion Dowd, expert in the archaeology of caves in Ireland, um, has reported on any Mesolithic caves in Ireland, but I happy to be stand corrected. And I'd love to learn more about Burren caves and their potential for Mesolithic remains. So the last section of the talk then, where to find sites, at least my opinion on it now, and I'm trying to step back and simplify this whole question of how to look for Mesolithic sites, or indeed just as a kind of a thought experiment, a way to frame thinking about or researching the Mesolithic of the Burren. It appears to me that any targeted survey in the Burren, looking for their sites, should take into account two questions. And these are questions that I have seen employed in Mesolithic surveys I've been involved in other places. And these questions are, what sorts of places did Mesolithic people in the Burren focus on? And where do we have a chance of coming across exposed early Holocene soil layers? In other words, where do we stand the best chance of finding soil from those periods, layers that might contain the remains of Mesolithic sites that hasn't either been eroded or covered by bog or other layers, or by rising sea levels, or indeed by human activity in later periods. Based on what we've found here so far, and also based on patterns elsewhere in Ireland, in my opinion, it's most likely that Mesolithic people in the Burren concentrated on watery places, lakes, rivers, the coast, and what are called ecotones, ecological zones where several habitats or microenvironments meet, which facilitates going out foraging, and being able to exploit multiple resource bases from a single camp. In the Burren, the prime candidates for such places are the coastlines near the mouths of valleys, river valley to the upland Burren. And where might we find relatively exposed and uneroded soil layers? Sorry. Which are called paleosols from that period. And again, I'd say that the coastline and the lakeside locations are the most promising. The coast has revealed several of the most important Mesolithic sites in Ireland to date. I think careful survey along the south of Galway Bay and in the mouths of valleys leading up into the Burren would be very good places to start. And if I may, a quick word about underwater sites, which is a lot of my bread and butter in archaeology as a marine and underwater archaeologist. Of course, the actual Mesolithic coastline is now several meters underwater in the west of Ireland, as I mentioned, and any of their underwater sites would almost certainly have been destroyed by waves and tides and currents. However, there are maybe sheltered inlets along the south of Galway Bay where sites could have been preserved, and we do have a few middens along that coastline, although most of these haven't been definitively dated to the Mesolithic. But one might think about other places where such underwater prehistoric sites have been found along the coast. And one was this little sheltered cove at the mouth of Lough Foyle, as I mentioned earlier, 11 Bally Bows. Marine archaeologist Kieran Wesley, working together with Peter Woodman, published that. And there's also the megalithic tomb down in Cork Harbour, Carrick-of-Austin. I know that that's Neolithic in date, but still just to illustrate the point of the potential of the intertidal zone in early Irish prehistory. Coming back to Galway Bay, I've heard some pretty funny stories from divers who've been doing a lot of diving on South Galway Bay for fun. And I have it on good authority from them that there's no shortage of flint artifacts that are now decorating divers' mantelpieces. and maybe going as Christmas presents and everything that have been found along this coastline from underwater sites. So it's definitely worth looking at, in my opinion. And another place to focus is, of course, the lakes of the Burren, a systematic survey around Loch Inchiquin. Great potential, I think, based on patterns elsewhere, for sites to be found among the wonderful stretch of lakes on the east side of the Burren, Loch Lurk, perhaps near Bell Harbour, loads of other and then there's the river valleys. Michael Lynch actually drew my attention to the Clare River, which provides a great means of access from Fenor up into the Burren uplands. And it's really the only convenient way there between those otherwise forbidding hills. Similarly, the Alla River, the Rathborny River, the Fergus above Inchiquin, and the valleys leading up into the Burren from the north at Ballyvaughan and so on. These are the places, as I imagine, Mesolithic campsites most likely to be found. When it comes to the best places for the preservation of Mesolithic low S soil layers near the surface, following the experts I mentioned earlier, not much point in going near the very exposed or very boggy land. The erosion that started after the Ice Age and took off in a big wave with Bronze Age farming means that we'll be very challenged to cross the exposed sections of the landscape. And there's also a lot of blanket bog development in the Burren. This question of exposed paleosols that might contain Mesolithic layers in them, early Holocene layers in them, is an ongoing one for me. I think the best people to consult would be Michael O'Connell, Karen Malloy, Colin Bunce, who I mentioned earlier, about the environment of the post-Ice Age Burren. So that's a work in progress, hopefully. But over and above all these questions and all these problems and limitations, I'd just like to finish, and I see that I'm finishing early here. Apologies for my nervous, quick talking. But over and above all of these questions, I'd just like to re-emphasize the relatively undisturbed nature of the Burren, and what an appealing place this undisturbed quality makes it for searching for Mesolithic sites, in that there's a chance of finding a camp or other site type which is quite well preserved, such a rarity. These are the locations in the Burren where I would imagine Mesolithic sites to be most likely to be found. And for anyone who might be interested, I continue to pursue this, to go out and formulate a research project to go looking for this really quite hidden, mysterious, very long period of Mesolithic hunter-gatherer people in the Burren. So thanks very much for listening. I'd love to say there is time, and sure, looks like it. So thanks, and apologies again for my rushed talking.
Thanks a million, Con. That was a really fantastic presentation, great detail and imagery. We have a couple of questions that we might touch on.
Great, thanks.
So the first question we had was, when did the first red deer come to Ireland?
And red deer were extinct during the Mesolithic, and they had been there before, and it has been proposed that they were actually brought to Ireland later, towards the end of the Mesolithic. It has even been proposed that bears were brought, and perhaps wild boar, because there were no land bridges then. There had been, when there were land bridges, red deer, reindeer, and other animals during the Ice Age. And of course, the giant giant Irish elk. So yeah.
Very good. There's an interesting question here. I think you kind of touched on it a little bit. Could it be that the frequency of Mesolithic sites by water was because travel by water
Mm,
or shoreline was easier than
mm.
transport through the impenetrable interior prior to farming clearances?
Yes, yeah, yeah, I think so. Absolutely, absolutely. I think, and use of water generally, sea travel, people's familiarity and comfort with use of water for travel transport um, was far greater than we appreciate. And that carries on into later periods of prehistory. It's just that we don't have much evidence for it. We do have a Mesolithic log boat found near Gormanstown in Meath off the coast during dredging for a cable or a pipeline, and it looked like it has like a remains of an outrigger on it. So you can picture something along the lines of Pacific Islander craft, ocean going craft. But yeah, traveling by boat and made a lot of sense
Yeah.
back then. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. Another question, is there any evidence of camps near Turlocks?
Yeah, no, I that indeed, yeah. I mean, there you go. One of the questions, one of the types of places to go look for. Um, I'd like to know more about which Turlocks we can rely trace back to still been present in that period of the early Holocene. Um, I don't know enough about it. I believe there's a degree of transience in Turlock patterns, but I'd like to know more about it. I know for some lakes they have strong evidence for early Holocene um, continuity, but Turlocks, yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, you see the birds attracted there, no doubt other animals, and perhaps unrelated to the animals. I mean, the draw of certain turlocks for other reasons is must be must be very potential.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was wondering,
Um,
sorry,
Go on,
um,
Pranjali.
Con, the waterways, you mentioned the rivers. Would the courses of the rivers not have been too different to the way they are today? Like if you were to think about
Mm, mm,
studying or excavating
mm,
riversides, for example,
mm.
would there
Yeah.
not be the problem of not knowing what way the river flowed
Yeah.
10,000
Well,
years ago?
yes. Yeah. I'm sure that the course itself must be changing over time. Um, you can well imagine the meanders altering and the banks altering, collapses driving the river course, rock collapses and so on, driving the course of the river elsewhere, and possibly human intervention. Um, but I think of a place like the Cahir Valley that Michael proposed surveying as a good candidate. It's a narrow defile of a valley. There isn't too far for that river to go. Um, the course may change, um, but working up that valley, um, there's the potential for sites to be eroded out of the riverbank and to be exposed there. Um, and the movement of the river might even work in one's favor in that way that it could erode and expose the site. I don't know, but yeah, I mean, it would be moving, and again, the experts in the paleo environmental data and the picture would be people I'd very much like to return to before embarking on any survey questions like that. Yeah, it's a great point.
And just I'd had one more question. You mentioned the acidic soils, but
Mm.
does the limestone not lend more alkaline kind of nature to the soils here? Does that not work in your favor as an archaeologist?
Yeah, it should in some cases, but I'm not seeing it so far in the case of the site. Could it be that the alkaline from the limestone happens to be exposed and interacting with the surface soil layers at just not in the places where campsites would tend to be found near water sources in relatively lower locations.
Okay, yeah.
But I'm trying to think. Yeah, I mean, certainly there should be the potential for that in some locations. Yeah, yeah,
Great.
yeah. Another great point. So
Um,
maybe you'll join us.
I've I've popped that webinar by Colin Bunce that you mentioned as well into the chat if anyone wants to have a
Yeah.
look at that later.
Oh, great.
One last question, I think, Con, was what happened to these Mesolithic people?
Um, yeah, we now know that the Neolithic wasn't just the first farming didn't come through the transition of ideas. We now know from ancient DNA studies that it was a significant population movement into Ireland, and with that, I think the Mesolithic population. I'd be presuming they were pushed to the margin and gradually, as we've seen throughout history, fading out, struggling to compete, struggling to hold on to territory in the face of the farming population. There's some evidence for interbreeding, and that may well have been the way of it to some extent. At Verder's Cove, they found what was almost certainly a domesticated cattle bone in a Mesolithic hunter-gatherer midden. So there's an interaction of some sort going on there. But however it transpired, there's very little overlap between Mesolithic tool typologies and the Neolithic. There was a relatively I mean, it took hundreds of years for the farming to take hold fully, but by the end of that, there is no presence of the Mesolithic populations as far as we can tell.
I was thinking those 4,000 years of must have been very hard life because there didn't seem to be very obvious hunting material there, none of the big animals, like you
Mm,
mentioned, no
mm,
wild cattle or any of that, but
mm.
just hare and small animals and whatever was in the rivers and lakes and the sea. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yes, I'm sure there was a lot of food stress, absolutely. I don't know now myself. Has anyone looked at isotopes in the teeth that might give away? I mean, there's so little remains surviving. I know from Britain there's indications of abundance and food stress periodically. In the Irish context, I would expect something similar. Certain seasons, certain places, there's rich food resources to be had in rivers along the coast, and with what was available for foraging. We don't have evidence that they were under food stress, and as looking at the Near East with the onset of farming, what we see is the reverse. Actually, that the earliest farmers were really struggling. They had a hard time with disease from living in permanent settlements year round. A lot of social issues with that as well. We see an uptake in violence with farming, and yeah, a lot of food stress, teeth problems. And a strong contrast with the Mesolithic peoples of that region, who were relatively affluent and comfortable, as it were, in resources. And it may have been the case here as well. I don't know that that's been looked into carefully, but the Neolithic populations who came here would have had to adapt to this environment, and it can't have been easy. And that's why I think we see a very slow transition to farming here from that first toehold. So
How
yeah,
does
I wouldn't be so sure. Yeah.
How does the Burren compare to other parts of the country in terms of findings on Mesolithic people or their whatever they left behind? Are
Yeah,
there
it's
certain hotspots where there have
mhm.
been more discoveries made of that
Yes, well,
period?
yeah, as I say, I mean, the classic Mesolithic site is on bluffs over rivers and
Okay,
in
yeah,
lowlands and in the wetlands and by lakes. Um, the Burren is largely upland,
yeah.
and yet there have been relatively few sites up here, which has really caught my interest. Um, it's the same for other upland regions. I mean, I think that in the northeast of Ireland, where generally Mesolithic archaeology has had a longer tradition and more focus, and also down in the Blackwater, and where people have been looking closely in Galway, along the Corrib, and in the Midlands. There's a lot of findings. There's been relatively little work done on the Mesolithic, and that's reflected in the limited findings here. And it is part of a larger pattern of the uplands not getting as enough of a look. It's a little bit of a vicious circle in a way. You know, the expectation is to find Mesolithic sites in certain places, and that's where people go to look, and that's where they find them. So a survey program in the Burren could be really interesting to offset that. And it is a place where, at least in certain pockets, there's a great potential for really well preserved sites. So
Fantastic. I hope it
yeah.
happens at some stage soon. Now that the word is out, if anybody has
Yes,
ideas of how to make that happen.
brilliant. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. I'd love to hear more. Yeah.
great. Well, that's it from me, Con. Thanks so much. Brian, if you have any questions, any more questions for Con, otherwise,
No, I think that's it. You've added Con's contact email in the chat.
yeah.
Um,
Great. And
yeah,
Jenny
thanks for the
Roach's,
comprehensive answers,
Yeah,
Con.
Jenny Roach's webinar is
thanks,
also
Million.
on the
Yeah.
YouTube channel. So I
Yeah,
think,
just
but
to mention.
it's just as easy to go search it on a YouTube channel. You can search for all the webinars that you mentioned. And I think we also have an archive on our website, don't we, of all the webinars
Yeah, I
to
actually have the
archaeology.
Jenny Roach one here as well, so
Yeah,
I'll throw that in.
that's
Yeah,
brilliant. Thank you, Con.
very interesting.
Thanks for your time. And
Thanks a lot.
hopefully we'll have you out in person leading one of the members' walks, which will be fantastic.
I'd love to. Yeah, love
Yeah.
to. Be a great pleasure. Thanks a lot.
Thanks very much. Have a good night.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Thanks, Con.
Thanks a million. You too. Bye bye.